Hello, I'm Susanna Beaumont and welcome to Des Talks, a lively celebration of creativity. We talk ideas and inspiration, challenges and delights with makers and artists from across Scotland. Today it's Laura Leith and Louise Bennetts, two Edinburgh-based designers who delight in materials, stitching, textile, texture, colour and form. They also share a love of architectural forms, memory of place, and walking through the streets of this city of Edinburgh. And please do explore our previous episodes, write a review, share with others, rave and rate us. Many thanks, and I do hope you enjoy our chat. Hello, I'm delighted to be talking to Louise Bennetts in her exhibition Urban Fabric at Custom Lane today. Hello, Louise.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're here with your wall hangings, your screen, but also work, we should say, by David Lem, an artist that you met on a Dundee club. Firstly, can you just say how you and David met, a fellow artist, in this particular Edinburgh club and how this exhibition came into being?
So it's really interesting. I went to see one of David's exhibitions and I loved his work. First and foremost, I was a fan. I thought what he's doing was really interesting, and it was through talking to him that I learned how much walking and the urban environment and experience of place was such a crucial part of his research. And I think he highlighted to me that he had this Dundee club.
And what does Dundee mean?
Wander, I think wander and experience. And it was a group of creatives, artists, architects who would get together, and someone with an intimate knowledge of a particular site would give a guided tour of that site, explaining largely why it was relevant to their practice. So he did one about the tram lines here in Leith. A sound artist did one at Arthur's Seat, and then there was a very memorable one out in Berwick Law, where an artist took us around explaining his kind of printmaking sculpture practice and how it related to the law. And it was, through these sort of Saturday or Sunday morning Dundee clubs that I got to know David a bit. And when I was approached by Custom Lane to do a Talks at the Lane evening, they explained that this current season was combinations of creatives in conversation talking about process. And I suggested David as a partner in conversation because I knew that his work and my work had a lot in common in terms of its roots, its methodology, but our materials and expertise were very different. He's working in wood, concrete, found objects. But I thought they would speak to each other quite well, which I'm pleased to say I think they really do.
And we're standing here looking at one titled Leith to Silver Nows. Can you tell me a little bit about that? It's freestanding work. It's a room divider, we could say, in kind of everyday parlance, but it's incredibly intricate. Can you tell me a little bit more about the fabric, like the way you work in textiles?
Yeah, so my background is more in clothes making, really. I'm a pattern cutter, clothes maker who later got more interested in constructing textiles and surface application, and I feel like this is really a marriage of all of that experience. It's a 3-panelled screen where the uprights are in birch plywood. The hinges, satisfyingly, are made from felt, so they're kind of soft textile hinges, and then the panels in the middle are made out of white cotton organdy, silk organza, and a slightly denser panelled fabric, which is actually an old curtain from my parents' home in London, and that has some relevance. It's called Leith to Silver Nows because that is the journey that my grandmother Nessie took effectively in her lifetime. She passed away midway through last year in Silver Nows. I knew she was born in Leith, but what I discovered after she died was that she had 6 addresses in between, which is remarkable because it's only about 5 kilometres. And out of personal interest, I went to visit these sites to see where she'd lived, to see this part of North Edinburgh that I didn't realise I had such a strong connection to. I grew up in London, as you can probably hear. And some of the sites just didn't exist anymore, truth be told. They'd been completely redeveloped. But I found that quite interesting, that Nessie and I sort of shared living in this city, and it's a city which in its own way is constantly regenerating. And so I made this design, which is an amalgam of drawings of building facades, maps from above, intricate details of quite banal things like bent railings, things that I found in these 6 sites, Leith to Silver Nows, to create this abstract amalgam, which is a sort of palimpsest of the experience of living in an urban fabric in flux.
And it's in these kind of creams and very light greys. It's translucent, and there's something very ephemeral, but also because you've got the hard, more kind of almost kind of, there's grids, there's curves, as you say, there's a hint of the cul-de-sac, but also it kind of reminds me of an old kind of book like an A to Z, because you are looking, there's a sense of the aerial, even though I'm looking at it, it stands horizontally. And I like that because you're somehow implicated in it because you can walk round it. So you're almost, I'm not just going from Leith to Silver Knowes, I'm going from back to front. And there's something about that I think makes it, one interacts with it more than just being a wall-based work.
Absolutely. And what's particularly satisfying to me as well with the translucency, and in some bits sheer, excuse the pun, transparency, is that this piece automatically absorbs whichever site it's installed within. So I first showed it at a gallery at the end of Ferry Road called Moat 102 Leith. I've had it in my own home, and I love that variously you can see here like a polished concrete floor through it, or you could see like a wooden panelled wall. I like that it too refuses to sort of stay still, and in bright light, be it sunlight or otherwise, it casts these really strong graphic shadows which themselves then drift across a room with the passing of daily light.
I mean, it's interesting because you studied fashion at Edinburgh College of Art, but it's through, and often it is through a death of somebody that's very close to us. We become more intimate with their lives and the architecture that they inhabited, or kind of remnants of a street. As you say, a lot has changed in this area of North Edinburgh in the last 10 years even. So there is that sense of you getting to know the past through the making process. Was that important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this city too, because I have lived here twice. I grew up in London, came up to study here, went back to London to work, and I've come back here. So it's a city that I've directly experienced in two separate lifetimes of mine, but it's also a city to which I'm deeply connected through not only my mum, but actually my dad's side as well. So it was also for me, back to that Daunder Club thing, it was a kind of method of exploring and understanding the city by foot.
Yeah, mapping. Yeah. I'm going to talk more with the other artists that we're going to be speaking to, Laura Lees, a little later, but I just want to move further around this exhibition and actually talk about this work that is suspended. And what, again, when you were talking about shadows, this piece casts beautiful shadows on the wall. It's entitled Black Iron Oxide. It's like strata, and we're going to, of course, mention Earth Matters, which is currently on at Inverleith House at Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. But can you just talk me through, and again, the palette of colours, we've got deep coal blacks, we've got kind of more terracotta, but this absolute sense of strata, and the process of what material you've used here and how you've got this kind of lattice work.
I'm really thrilled that you picked this one to speak about, actually, because it's the sort of first work in the show, quite intentionally, because it, to me, really confounds any idea of chronology. Many of the works that are on show here are made from the offcuts, fringes, byproducts of creative work that I have done ostensibly towards another purpose. So as well as having my own practice, I do quite a lot of freelance development for other clients, and there's lots of stuff that comes about by way of that. And I'm always holding on to these things thinking it will be good for something else, not this, but something else. So this is, much as it's this kind of strict linear form, it actually darts around the place. It sort of meanders through time, because within this construction, which, as you say, is these horizontal strata of fabric, there are variously wool offcuts from a weaving project I did 4 years ago, unravelled bits of yarn from a black garment I made a year and a half ago that just frayed like mayhem. There's fragments of test pieces of earth pigment dyeing when I was developing the hanging pieces that are currently in the Botanics. In that context, they were too opaque for that project, but quite beautiful in their own right. And then layers of black organza too, and they're all arranged in a seemingly sort of a very ordered way. But to me, it's this collection of all the edges of things, all the stuff that might otherwise have been tossed onto the quite literal cutting room floor.
So the beautiful irony here that they cease to become edges, except the top and bottom strip in a way,
exactly.
Because they are reunited. And I'm curious to know when the leftovers of a bigger project or a period of experimenting with dyes and pigments, do they fall to the studio floor, and do you then gather them? There's a sense that everything is always picked up and gathered.
Yeah, everything is always picked up, gathered, and really very little gets truly thrown away. I feel like there's always something I can find to do with it, and often it's I think it's out of respect, for me, it's out of respect to the material. I often talk about it as a bit like nose to tail cooking, in that it's like using the whole thing, paying respect to having cut into this cloth in the first instance. And within here as well, there's these, selve edges, but also loom tape, which is the really unruly stuff that mills can't really do much with because it's very liable to shrink. And it's fun being presented with these design conundrums of how on earth might we use this byproduct towards something which we think is unruly, we think is trash, but could it be rendered as something exquisite? And I really like playing with that contradiction.
No, I love that analogy with nose to tail. So it is that tricky snout or that curly tail, literal curly yarn that you are embracing. And with something like this, do you lay it out? What is your kind of sense of composition? Do you, in your workshop, which is in the south side of Edinburgh in Marchmont, are you layering out? Is it kind of like a collage at one point where you're layering the fabric and arranging it, and then you decide to take a stitch and sew it and bring it all together?
So I feel like there's two separate strands with this one. For a piece like this, which is really quite linear, quite geometric, like you say, it's like strata. Believe it or not, this is kind of the most playful, because as long as the seams are straight to each other, then I can really make it up as I go along. And maybe one of the pieces might have started as double the width, and I've cut it in half, and I've changed the sequence, changed the order, and I kind of build it up as I go. With other pieces that are much more compositional, more like the pieces in Earth Matters, pieces here about Marchmont or the screen, they might look sort of poised, collage, suspended, but truth be told, it's quite complicated seaming these intricate shapes to one another, so they're actually really quite meticulously planned.
We're now looking at 3 hanging pieces. It's a triptych. It's hanging over a window, in front of a window even, at Custom Lane here in Leith. And it's called Desire Lines, which is always a turn of phrase that almost kind of makes me go weak at the knees, because it is the desire of the human to not stick to a pavement, but to create. And there's some wonderful ones at Arthur's Seat and across Holyrood, and they are tracks. So we're like sheep, aren't we? And tell me about, where are these desire lines from?
Love that. It's like curatorial catnip. These are desire lines from Marchmont, which is where I live and where I work from. And much like I was talking about the kind of cross-pollination of having different creative projects at any one time and the materials that they release, of course there's also stories that happen and cross-pollinate and percolate in my brain. And these earthy tones of dark red were actually materials I made for the Earth Matters commission, but ended up not using. I went with a slightly different palette for the third one, but I had them at home. Those materials were painted outside, as some people will know, in the back of my tenement garden in Marchmont. And it was in conversation with Corinne Polwart, actually, at the fruit market, that she quite separately was talking about this meeting that happened between James Hutton, who else, Walter Scott, a few other sort of crucial Edinburgh folk. Joseph Black.
Adam Ferguson.
And she showed this painting, and the painting was in sheens. And I think anyone with the recording who was there would have seen my face, because I had no idea that meeting happened in sheens. And the funny thing is, that means that these paintings were painted effectively in the backyard of the site of that meeting. And having made these site-specific works at the botanics that were for Leith House and of particular unconformity sites, actually the very site in which they were made had this real profound resonance. So with the leftover materials, I thought it would be fitting to construct them into a bit of a homage to Marchmont. It's a funny little area. I live on a crescent, which it's not connected top to bottom. It sort of sends everyone off halfway through, which effectively then prompts some quite strange design lines. And I did a few drawings of that kind of similar map making from above, how one walks through the space, and then constructed them into this triptych amalgam abstract composition.
And I suppose with maps, I mean, I'm always still fond of a paper map, but more often than not, we are all using Google Maps, and where you can go from, an aerial view, which is photographic, to a cycling map, to this map, to a topography map. What is interesting with this, you used your earth pigments outside, and I think a lot of the time it was quite wet and raining, because this was back in February. You get these sort of kind of tidal, it's almost tidal, so you're bringing in another, as when you look down on a beach and you see how it's kind of being rippled, and maybe something, a seaweed is strewn across it, and the colour, because a palette is these kind of light sandy colours to dark ochres, an earthy soil colour. But there's something, yes, because we can see evidence of water, is that right, that we can see?
It's absolutely that, although it's slightly counterintuitive, because the darkest dribbles of pigment on these textiles are actually from the driest of days, because as the pigment was dripping down back towards the earth, it got sort of frozen there by drying in the wind. The wettest textiles are a sort of totally mottled washout. And I love the unpredictability of the textiles within this composition, that they themselves create new moments of composition that I couldn't necessarily have anticipated.
And we should just say, before we finish this part of our kind of conversation podcast today, the sense of architectural. A number of works here are hanging, suspended from the ceiling, a number are attached to the wall. And again, with beautiful, you're right to point out the felt on your screen, because there's attention to how you've hung the work. There's beautiful, and I think on one of them you've used a little bit of a top of a pulley from a blind. So there's a beautiful ingenuity. But do you see these works as architectural pieces that complement a space? What is that? I'm very aware that you are very conscious of the space that you're inhabiting, whether it's temporarily for an exhibition or maybe even long-term for a permanent commission.
Absolutely. I mean, my folks were architects, so that was always an influence. And then I designed for my career clothing, which is always in dialogue with a sense of sight, that sight being the body. It's a really 3D form of design. And so then with the textiles pieces, I do think of them as interior objects that occupy space. Arguably the hardest thing I've ever tried to convince myself to do is to make something that would hang on a wall, because I find it actually a really flat thing to interact with. So you'll notice that much as many of these pieces are wall mounted, I'm really resistant of the flatness of, say traditional framing. I really wanted them to have a sense of depth, because I feel like these textiles live very much in 3D space.
And I suppose that's where the shadow comes into play, because the shadow is always on the move.
Yeah.
A shadow will come and go, the sun comes out, the sun goes in, the lights are turned off, the lights are on. So in a way, your shadow is your moving part, in a way that the body is the moving part. And you have one at the Moat exhibition that was last year, you did show blouses, and I was so taken when you talked about a blouse being a sculpture, because it is 3D and it has a volume, and it has more volume when somebody is in it. I suppose then that volume is filled. But I really like that correlation and the way that you've navigated and moved. And you still do make articles of clothing, you still make sculptural works for the body, and these are sculptural works for a space.
Absolutely. Couldn't put a bit on myself. Thanks, Susanna.
Hello, we're now sitting in the downstairs room at Bard in Leith, and I'm sitting across the table from Laura Lees. Thanks very much, Laura, for joining Des Talks today. And we're sitting here together with a teapot, pick-me-up tea, with your work. And I'm in front of your pinboard. We've got a denim jacket, we've got lots of stitching, we've got fabric, we've got denim, we've got leather. Tell me how all this began. You started stitching, or you studied tapestry at Duncan of Jordanstone and Dundee.
So prior to going to Dundee, I'd always embroidered. I'd always sewn. I think I was first inspired in my mother's sewing room, and just all those threads and guddling about in her sewing box always inspired me. I was like, oh, what's that? Oh, how could you make this? And I was never, ever good at making clothes. My sisters were fabulous at it, and I just didn't have that technical ability. So for me, embroidery was this really easy way to create patterns. And then once I took it into a sewing machine, it just seemed to explode. And I didn't have the same confidence with drawing, but somehow the translation from a needle puncturing the marks in fabric just gave me this confidence, and I was slightly removed, and it made me understand, I can do anything here. What I do is I draw out first of all an image, and then I follow it on I overlay it with a fabric, and then I just draw with the needle.
So do you think it is drawing with the colour of threads and
absolutely,
that you were absolutely enthralled? Because I'm looking at the piece behind you. Maybe describe this piece, which is on a model, a mannequin, and it's beautiful flames of colour.
So this is Las Vegas dress, and it's like every piece of my work. I think we had no money when we were first down in London, and so everything evolved. It used to be the dartboard dress, and it had lots of darts on it and a big dartboard, and then it evolved into, from that blank canvas, it evolved. I'd just been a trip to Vegas, and it evolved into all these pictures that I'd taken, and it was because it was black and it had this gorgeous sort of puncturing the light into it. So then it's all the threads, all the lights are depicted in threads.
And was it the outfit you found and then you stitched into it, or did you create the outfit?
No, I found the outfit.
You found the outfit. So you find your material, your host in a way,
yeah.
Whether it's a jacket or a dress, and then this was through being inspired by the garish lights and music and pace and rhythm, I suppose, of Vegas. These wonderful, you've got stars, it's a wash with colour. So how did you then, because in a way then you're mapping these images onto the outfit and then you're taking the needle?
Yeah, so this, again, this lent itself so beautifully because I could open the zip right up and then I could embroider it flat. We'd just come back from Vegas, we just got married there, we hadn't told anyone. I had sent my parents a postcard from Vegas to say I was married, which was kind of nice. And so it was that lovely rhythm of walking up the Strand and seeing this repetition of lights. And so then the dress lent itself perfectly for that symmetrical pattern.
No, it's a total beauty. It's a total beauty. And maybe now, I mean, you studied at Duncan of Jordanstone, you studied tapestry. Indeed. So where does tapestry come into? Because there is differences between tapestry and embroidery.
Absolutely. So as a child, we were dragged round cathedrals, stately homes, and I was always really drawn to the tapestry, and I absolutely adored the rendering of fabrics, the lush silks and everything, and how that was replicated, and how you could get a shine in fabric, you know, through tapestry. So the embroidery, when I went to Duncan of Jordanstone, I had the 3 disciplines of tapestry, knitting and weaving, and I stupidly didn't really read the prospectus properly, so I thought I was doing sort of fine art fabric sculpture. I had no idea. And then so when I found tapestry, I was like, this is fantastic. This gives you the medium to take textiles out of that sort of crafty domestic setting, and we're sort of fed this endless diet that's what textiles are. They are a very homely thing, they're a domestic thing, and tapestry just instantly gave me the language that this can go big. This can go really big scale and can be really prestigious and contemporary. And nobody's going to question, oh, but that's just textiles.
And I suppose thinking those kind of big stately homes and even kind of cathedrals, often you get those huge wall hangings, which do 3D, they're rich, there's so much you could kind of dive into them, the enormity of them all. So is that a kind of early inspiration and thinking this is scale and this is grand? Yes,
absolutely. It was the grandeur of it that really drew me in, and it was the ability to scale up. Because on a machine, you're working so small, you can't really get much in under the machine. I mean, I have ploughed vast lengths of fabric under there, but you're really constricted by what you can actually manoeuvre in this small plate, basically. So when you're working at a tapestry loom, it's vast. It's absolutely huge. And I did grow up in Dovecot Road, so I was always like nipping along to the Dovecot studios and looking in the window and had no idea that's where I'd end up. You'd look in and these big mechanical looms, they just blew me away. I just thought, this is fantastic.
And it's a sound they make as well.
Yeah, well, the tapestry, it's the weaving looms that make a clattering noise, but the tapestry, it seemed the mechanics of it was the big sort of turning arm at the top, so you could create these huge tapestries. And it was knowing as well that you were sitting in front of a loom and there was this colossal amount of stitches underneath you. When I was there, I was sort of sharing a flat with Aaron Garbutt, who's gone on to do Rockstar Games, and we were playing lots of Tekken, and I was like, it was really huge on we had a big projector on his wall and we play that, and I was like, this is just like big pixels. That's what tapestry looks
Yes,
like.
yeah.
So I was really into that sort of digital image and translating that into tapestry.
And so after the Dundee years, London beckoned, and there you worked with a number of designers such as Giles Deacon and Luella. You set up your own brand. Tell me a little bit about those years and what you were making.
So it was kind of accidental in terms of embroidery was a very easy access to sell my work because tapestry commanded such a sort of significant amount of time. So for embroidery, it was like I put on this jacket that you can see over here. I embroidered that for myself years ago, and then I just was always in the bricklayer's arms, or everyone was hanging out in Shoreditch, and it was way before it was...
When are we talking? Early 2000s?
Oh no, 97.
Late 90s.
Yeah, so there was nothing open there, and there was like that one pub, the Bricklayers, and I worked in there, and so I'd always put my jacket on, and you'd see like Katie Grant, Giles, all that lot, and you'd be like, oh hi, and stand in front of them like that. Oh, look at my jacket. You want this, don't you? And
they did.
And they did. And so it was kind of brilliant. And I'd be picking up sort of, you'd be walking through the streets of London. You wouldn't have any money. You wouldn't be able to get the night bus home. You probably missed the night bus home. So you were walking about and you're always picking up little conversations or seeing bits of graffiti or just these little micro bits of advertising as you're walking along, and it would make me giggle, some of the things that you'd see, so I'd slap them on a jacket. And so for the Luella jacket, we changed it into the iconography of her brand, and that was a sort of limited edition of 24 jackets, which all had to be the same, but naturally they weren't all the same because I was sitting there by myself doing these, and you know there's a little quirk of hand or a mistake that's made, so each one was rendered kind of individual.
And it seems to me, again, looking at this pinboard, which is probably kind of 3 meters long, and it has photographs of your kids. It's got Lee Scratch Perry tickets for a concert he never could make at Summerhall in Edinburgh. There's cards, there's postcards, there's colour swatches. Tell me how important this was, because this has travelled with you from early years in Edinburgh, Dundee, London, now back to Edinburgh. What is this? Is it samples? Is it life? Is it a diary? Yeah,
it's a sort of a diary, and things that you didn't realise were important to you they've still stayed on the pinboard. And it's ever evolving, and that's kind of been lovely about it. I travelled, when I went to Dundee, this pinboard came with me, and you'd sort of pick up silly things and stick them on, and then certain things would fall away and something else would take precedence. And so, like the pinboard we're looking at just now is such a small fraction of the amount of stuff that's sort of spewed out of the sewing machine. It's a visual diary. I've always taken in pictures. I've always had these things just to remind me, oh, I like that. I always had Macintosh's Fritillaria, and that was on my pinboard as a child, and I always sort of like felt so sort of comforted when I saw that. And now when I grow them in my garden, I sort of see them and go, oh, that's that coming back, repetition. So this pinboard is just a mass visual diary of many of the jobs that I've done.
And just now that you've been back in Edinburgh, I think since 2019, and there's a work here, there's a number of works which are looking at Edinburgh, iconic, and I use that word advisedly because they are iconic buildings, say the Surgeons' Hall here in Edinburgh, the National Disgrace, which is up on Carlton Hill, or the Royal Observatory, which is now a collective gallery on Carlton Hill. You always seem to have a viewpoint that is not what you would expect. You're looking it up, you're almost cowering beneath the kind of the grandeur of these buildings, but also a degree of intimacy, and then how you stitch. Can you tell me a little bit about the one that is hanging here of collective building?
I really consciously chose these buildings because I'm really interested in architecture, and we live in cities, and that's what really drew me to these buildings. But I really loved that sort of prestige of Edinburgh being known as the Athens of the North, and it's the nature of these classic buildings. And the viewpoint has always been to look up, and I don't want to see the foundations of it. I love looking at plans, but I wanted to see the sort of impact of how it made you feel, that you'd look up and be awe-inspired, that this is a place of learning, this is a monument of grandeur, and that's what I really, really loved about these buildings. I also really liked taking a very contemporary look at them, so I'd always like to get the very sharp angle of a corner or your straight up and sky, and make the sky this sort of well, in Scotland you don't often get the blue sky, so when I did pair it with these blue leathers, it was to give it like, wow, we've got the blue sky and this really sharp edging.
Because it almost teaches on to abstraction, the
Absolutely.
way that you've got that angle, but a sense that you can be in the gutter, but you can still be looking up at the stars.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really beautiful thing, is that when you're looking up at, especially when it's a crowded city. So in Edinburgh we have this beautiful space everywhere, but when you're in London you'd be quite hemmed in, and I used to walk through the city late at night after you've been out and about. It'd be really fantastic that you'd lie on the ground and look up and you'd get this really gorgeous negative space where the buildings weren't. And that really excited me. Then it became about the patterns that were made and the abstraction, and not looking at it as buildings but as forms within a space.
Brilliant. Well, I've now brought Laura and Louise together. There's so much, we realise, architecture, mapping, tracing, memory, stitching, fabric that kind of unites their work. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how they could riff off each other. I'm going to first come back to Laura, because I remember you saying that as quite a young child, your parents took you to the Barbican.
Oh, yeah. It was so incredible, because you were so used to Edinburgh's sort of public spaces were very sort of neo-Gothic, or they were, in tradition of Edinburgh. And then the Barbican was just like, oh, what is this place? This is contemporary. This is fantastic. The hardware on the door handles. I was like, from the very first moment that you push that door open, I was like, this is fantastic. Right down to the handrails, down to the loos. Every part of it just excited me, and the materiality of the concrete and how that was poured. And it was just not what you saw in Edinburgh. And I thought, what a fantastic place of culture to celebrate it in this grandeur scale.
And that, you should say, is, I'm sure everybody knows, but it is a wonderful kind of residential museum, gallery and concert hall, theatre by Chamberlain, Powell and Bon in London. And also now we're sitting looking at what I would say is another cracking building, but this time in Edinburgh, is the Royal Commonwealth Pool, which I know is, again, on the south side of Edinburgh. It must be quite near where you live.
Absolutely.
By Rumjum, Edinburgh architects. I think it opened in the early 70s for the Royal Commonwealth Games. Tell me what has taken your eye, and maybe Louise, you have something to say on this iconic. Maybe you swam in there as well. Do you swim in there?
I swim there a lot, and I remember it being built, and I remember my grandmother, who lived just in Minto Street, really complaining about this absolute atrocity of a building. And I remember going past it going, that looks magnificent. That looks like the modern world has come to us and it's given us a great big hug. And I was so excited by it. And so coming back to Edinburgh, I felt so rooted to go back to the Commonwealth Pool, because I mean, it's an epic building to be inside, but the diving boards are like pieces of sculpture and theatre, and in the winter I would just sit there and watch all these people diving off it, and it was so warm and cosy and familiar, that smell of chlorine, and it's a wonderful building.
But Granny didn't like
it was preposterous.
And maybe that kind of takes us back to, we were talking earlier about your grandmother and mapping, and this is something that both of you do. Maybe talk a little bit more about how you enjoyed and relished looking at buildings and architecture, and particularly your grandmother, because that piece we've just seen at Custom Lane was very much inspired by the architecture of her life.
Yeah, and I mean, we're in Leith, right? We're at the shore. We're at Custom Lane. It would be, I can't imagine what my grandma would have thought of the idea of a contemporary craft gallery down here next to where I've also got an exhibition. These areas have changed so much. She used to tell me about when she rode the tram first time round, when it was a penny for the whole day, so they'd just sit on it going round and round and round as an activity. And like the regeneration of all this bit, this kind of Granton, Pilton, along to Silvernowes, it's quite astonishing. I mean, she was nearly 100 when she died, amazing age, and what a century of development to have witnessed.
Incredible.
Absolutely astonishing. And I think, like I was mentioning, this is the second time I've lived in Edinburgh, but we used to come up all the time, like when I was kids. So I feel like it's a city I've got quite a layered relationship with, and I love that way of interacting with the places in which we live and these changing cityscapes. I mean, speaking of the Barbican, I grew up in Islington, so it's just nearby. We used to walk through the Barbican all the time when I was a kid, go and play in the fountains. And then when I had my first design job, we were based on Old Street. I used to sit there and eat my lunch of a nice day.
Yeah.
And now, like, I'll go back and visit it. I love returning to these spaces and forming...
When we first lived in Old Street, there was nothing open, so you had to walk to the Barbican to get a pint of milk. I was like, I'll readily go get the pint of milk. I'm happy for this.
Totally. It's an astonishing place just to casually walk through.
And as we've said, it's that attention to detail, particularly the Barbican, as you say, kind of the handles, the flooring, the banisters, everything, and the angles that you get. And just going back to your work, Laura, you've also looked at the Royal Surgeons' Hall, and again, looking back at the kind of classical alongside the modernist. I love this kind of, I always often say this, but you're right to roam between the kind of classical, the iconic, to the kind of wonderful modernist of the 20th century. We were talking earlier about Scottish Widows building by Basil Spence here in Edinburgh. Do you feel that you can roam wherever, that you can doff your hat to the ancient and modern?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can't have good, clean, modern architecture without understanding the classics. And then when it's beautifully stripped back, the classics, you know, there's nothing missing from it. It's so profoundly beautiful. So it's the sort of rubbish in between that really upsets me. I've got no appetite for the banal. But then when you look at a Doric pillar, it just gets me. I don't know why I get so excited by that, but it really does. And then when you see it rendered in contemporary, like poured concrete, but then like the outside of the Hunterian Museum where it's encased Macintosh's house, those ripples of concrete is just fantastic. And that, to me, again, it makes me think of a Doric pillar.
And when it comes to stitching, because your work takes in, again, I'm looking across at that denim jacket, because often you use language as well, you're using words. How do you then incorporate, because again, you bring in the kind of what I would say is decorative as well as the architectural. Again, your spectrum is large and generous.
Well, it's what excites me, what ignites me. So I'm quite happy as well for like a ludicrous big hot dog building. You know, if it's over the top and kitsch and funny and with the integrity. It doesn't have to be tasteful. So there, it's all encompassing. I'm quite happy with the really beautiful, slick Palladio facade to, you know, the neon bright light. It's what sort of makes a city alive. So I'm quite happy to sort of layer all the different centuries.
And do you feel the same? I mean, that's what you're doing as well, Louise, in a way your work, often it's fabric which is translucent, there's kind of hints of colour, but your palette is from the kind of ochres to the browns to the sandy colour to the creams. Do you ever think, I don't know your earlier work so well, but having worked in fashion and textiles, do you like that kind of restriction of a palette and that it's looking at something more architectural and purist? Is that the right word?
Yes, I think it would be fair to describe myself as a purist. I think in the work that I'm doing myself now, colour is really derived from material rather than having a predetermined colour palette, which is often how it works in fashion, particularly textile print design. And I think I'm really enjoying sort of fleshing out the honesty of that process. Like I've slightly tongue-in-cheek, one of the textiles in urban fabric I call like a kind of concrete. I mean, of course, it's not. It's sort of the greyer tones of the earth pigment painting, but it doesn't half feel like a piece of suspended concrete, but of course it's super light. And then the browns, the yellows, those ochre colours coming through, they're all from proper ground down earth pigments, and I like that rawness, that honesty. And I think for the piece like the screen, which is all in white, that really was an exercise in distillation. I really wanted it to be, it's complex in its composition, and I think I've described it before as like a sort of suspended drawing in space. And for that complexity and the sort of palimpsestic slight ghostliness of the whole thing, I actually just thought colour-wise, let's put it right back.
And as we were saying, it's the interaction and the fall of shadows and how the light within the room, within its context, breathes in and out. And that is something that, as you say, gives it its presence, where it's on the fade button is pressed or then it comes back. Yeah. But what I'm always say with both of you both have your own practices, but you also do collaborations. You still both work in fashion. Laura just finished a very big commission with Waldo. Maybe actually, as we're looking at a piece from an earlier work, which I find beautiful. So we're looking at a drapery come curtain kind of wasted with this kind of sash of leather in a kind of dirty green or racing green maybe. But tell me about this pattern, because this is again you collaborating with a big London-based company. How does that work, and how does that kind of settle within your everyday life within a studio where you might think, I just want to get on and look at architecture? Or
I find these, sure you find it yourself, where you're presented with drawings that aren't your designs. This is Tom Bartlett's design, and it was an embroidered room, and the palette is very different from what I would choose, but it's really exciting to be the hand for someone else, because you're working with designs and you're wanting to make sure that you're delivering above and beyond what their expectations, and that's really important to me. And so I've just recently done something that's in your palettes where it's sort of ghostly and white lines, and I just don't choose to work in that myself, but it's really, really lovely. It's quite stressful because I'm quite sort of, you're worried about getting marks on things and you're working with an industrial machine, but it's a really joyous...
And what were you doing exactly? Where did you give your hands?
So you're translating the designs onto fabric and then running this really sheer, beautiful linen, white linen with tonal embroidery through an industrial sewing machine. So the preparation for that is nerve-wracking. You're like, okay, I've got to make sure that, it's not running into the fan belt and they catching marks from that. Cleaning down the studio, having sort of like fabric on the floor so it's not picking up muck on the floor, and that's the bit. And then you suddenly get quite cavalier and you forget, I know what I'm doing here, and start battering it through the machine. It's like, oh Christ, remember, this is not your own work, this is someone else's. And I think that takes on a different level of concentration.
I think it's so good for your design skills. Yeah. You're really not designing on instinct. You're designing quite critically to be like, well, the brief is X, their customer is Y.
Absolutely.
What is the appropriate solution in this context to that particular puzzle, so to speak? And at the risk of sounding really, really nerdy, I like the puzzle solving of it. My master's collection at the Royal College was all black, and it was all different textures. It was all different materials, but they were all black one way or another. Not unlike that black iron oxide piece next door. And then the first job that I got was for Roxandra Linchett. She was literally known as the Queen of Colour, and it was brilliant. She liked my portfolio because it was quite architectural, and she trained as an architect first. So in terms of cutting and 3D shape, she kind of wanted me to work on that. And in truth, Roxandra steers the colour over there. But it was so good for me. Yeah. And I worked on embroidery, I worked on knitwear, I did like big towering high heels, stuff that really wasn't in my instinctive wheelhouse, but it was really good for stretching those muscles.
So it's like there's this wonderful kind of gymnasium of
totally.
exercising in different materials and different techniques.
It's a really good comparison, yeah.
Yeah, it's also you have a different approach to it because you know your craft, you know your skill set, and then when someone's demanding this off you, it's not like you doubt yourself, but you're really overcritical. Whereas something that you were doing for yourself, you put it through and you're like, yeah, that looks great, I know that. But when it's, as you say, your client and then the end product, you're like, oh my God, is that perfect? It's got to be perfect.
But in a way, your skills have been celebrated by a big client, which again, it's hard work and it's very exacting, but you are being celebrated for what you can do.
Yeah, and you just do not want to let that commissioning client you just don't want to let them down. It's like, I want to deliver this perfect thing for you.
But just going back to your own work and the way that you're both flaneurs, and I love the fact that you, Louise, has kind of spent time as a student here, but has memories of Edinburgh as a child. Likewise, you've had your London years and now back here. And this kind of layer of memories and time and how buildings change or buildings extracted and there's gap sites. And likewise, in our own memory, there's gap sites of what we can remember. How do you feel that you want the next few years to be in your own practice? Is there anything that you feel that you're eyeing up that you want to do, or buildings you want to particularly get to know by drawing them, embroidering them, or creating them through thread and leather, say, Laura?
Yeah, there's a few I've still got to do. I really want to immerse myself more in Scottish widows, but I'm going to have to be quick because it's all getting renovated, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what I found was really funny is coming back to Edinburgh and walking down streets going, I have never walked down this street before. That's mental. Like, I know the city because it's so small. So I was looking at your pieces through there and you were like, that's Marchman. Instantly you know it because you're so familiar. If you're flaneur, you're constantly walking the streets. I pick up everything, I remember everything. It's like, oh, there's that really annoying little bit, and there's little bits on the path that excite you as well, and you sort of, oh, I'm going to pass that, blah blah bit. So yes, I think I'd like to sort of revisit all these lovely maps again. It still excites me, those.
And Louise, more mapping and walking and exploring Marchmont and beyond?
Yeah, and I think also just really sensing sort of spaces. I'm really interested in through the experience of one space, be it like a city, urban environment or a micro environment, making things that then themselves occupy a space, and how to flesh that out. So I've done sort of freestanding interior objects, things that are on walls. I don't know, is there a slightly more sculptural translation of this that is another kind of space that we could occupy, and what would that be like in another space somewhere in Edinburgh? I think it's as much about the research of places to explore as how then that gets applied.
I suppose just I mentioned that your parents are both architects, but when you were commissioned to do the piece for Earth Matters, but you echoed the very strong architectural space, so your partner is always the building.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot because I've noticed that not everyone does that instinctively. Whereas to me, what the pieces I would put in this sort of lower ceilinged white walled space in Custom Lane is very different to how I would respond to the beautiful crumbly patinated walls of Moat 102 or in Leith House. And I think that comes from having, like I said before, designed very much in dialogue with the body. And I'm totally a kind of dialogue designer. I find it really difficult to do things that exist as a standalone thing. I'm like, how does it bounce off something else? I think that's probably why I get so hooked by transparency and light and movement. I want to make these things that are responsive.
And there's a quote which I just want to share with you both and all our listeners, that I was thinking about both your work, that the sense of kind of memory and movement through kind of time, and you've both talked about your grandmothers, but it's Twyla Tharp, the American dancer and choreographer, and she said, art is the only way to run away without leaving home. And it seems to me that both your work is about home. I mean, you remembering your grandmother that died last year, Louise, you talking about. I was wondering, what was where the Royal Commonwealth Pool was before? What did your granny miss? Was that just a gap site? I wonder. It was
the chimney that blocked her view.
Oh,
I was like, it's really not a big chimney. Honestly, it's not. You can still see Arthur's seat in its full splendour.
But yes, I think the way you both so sensitively kind of explore and share your explorations with us through these exhibitions. So thank you so much indeed for being so generous.
Thank you.
But now I'll say, is there anything that you wish you had said or want to say again or say more loudly?
Well, I do want to actually explore, just going back to the Commonwealth, I really do want to explore, I suppose my background as well has been in fashion, and we touched on it the other day when we were talking about that really fantastic thing when you're swimming with people, strangers, and you're swimming along, you're like, I can't read you, and fashion's all about reading people. You're like, okay, what are you doing? I like this, or I don't like this, or I understand this. Your response is irrelevant, but when you're swimming, you just can't see what people are. And then I love it when you go out, but you're in the changing rooms, and then you go out and you get onto your routes of where you're going home, and you're like, oh, is that who you are? And so I really want to explore. I've got a big pile of research that I've done on the Commonwealth and on water and bodies of water, but I want to really look into the fashion of people outside the swimming pool. And obviously I'm going to be very selective, and I'm going to choose the fashion that I like, but that's something that I really think is quite exciting. worth exploration. And then you can start to look at how you render clothes and tapestry again, and it harks back to seeing all these fantastic medieval tapestries and everyone in their big fancy robes. So that's something that I'm going to be.
It puts me in mind of what you used to get out of a cereal box where you could dress.
I love them. I've still got one of those little tab clothes that you can put on.
Because you could, and all those different outfits, the way you kind of, it puts me in mind that you have these bodies that are just in a pair of swim shorts or swimming costume. I swim quite a lot, and then you think, God, yeah, frumpy pants.
Yeah. And look at you, I expect you to be so fabulously chic.
Yes, well, you hope that's what they're thinking about me, obviously. Yeah. Louise, anything you would like to add?
I'd look forward to it, Laura.
Shall we all go swimming in the Commonwealth?
Oh yes, let's do it.
I'll rock up to the Commonwealth in my finest gear.
I was just going to ask, anything that you wish you were reading at the moment or want to read? It could be a novel, or it could be something you read along a Ladybird book even.
I was saying to you, actually, I do a huge amount of listening when I'm making. So I could get through a whole audiobook in a day, and I get through lots of podcasts, yours included, of course. And recently, I have read The Living Mountain, but there's an audiobook which is read by Tilda Swinton.
Nan Shepherd, we're talking.
Yes, it's just stunning.
Oh.
And it's read so beautifully, it really made me feel like I was hearing it anew.
I'll talk about Nan Shepherd, not because I think she's just released The Lonely City as well.
Excellent stuff.
By Olivia Lang. That was really well reviewed, which I haven't heard. Do you listen to when...
Well, I've not been able to when it's the sewing machine, because it's just clatters away and it's so horrific, the noise. Actually, really looking forward to immersing myself in tapestry. So yeah, a lot of podcasts, really into history podcasts, and just that fantastic thing of like, I want to understand this that I've never really understood before. Look it up, boom, someone gives you a really fantastic deep dive. But I remember a book that really changed my approach to work, actually, as well, was Diane Suchek's 100 Mile City. I just loved that, and I loved when he was talking about Ricardo Bofill's Paris complex, where it was so close together that you could actually smell your neighbour's toothpaste. And I just loved these sort of things. I thought, oh yeah, that's what really made me sort of investigate and really explore cities.
That's a very good suggestion. We'll put that in the notes that will accompany this podcast. But thanks so much again,
Thank you.
Laura and Louise. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Susanna and Laura.
Yeah, thank you.
Huge thanks for listening to our conversation with Louise and Laura. And coming up soon on Des Talks, we visit Hospitalfield in Arbroath to talk to the artist Florence Peake. We head to Orkney to visit the Pure Arts Centre, and we talk tapestry with weavers at Dovecote. So do please subscribe and follow to keep in touch with Des Talks. And huge thanks as ever to Ryan Scott Media and to Malin Lewis for our wonderful music.